blood on her lipstick, smoke in the air. Geneva Hilliker didn't just walk into danger. She kissed it, pulled the trigger, and smiled. Before we dive into the life of this crimson-lipped outlaw, make sure to hit subscribe and step into the underworld where beauty, bullets, and betrayal collide. The night Geneva Hilliker was born, thunder cracked over Kansas City like the sky itself was warning the world, she's coming. Her mother, a jazz singer with cigarette-stained fingers and a heart full of regret, named her after a perfume she could never afford. Her father, a drifter with whiskey breath, disappeared before Geneva ever learned to walk. The world didn't hand her much. But what it did give her, a sharp tongue, a quick mind, and eyes that could freeze a man mid-lie. She learned to weaponize. By 14, she was the kind of girl mothers warned their sons about. Too pretty for her own good, too smart to play innocent. The neighborhood boys followed her like moths chasing a flame. But Geneva didn't want attention. She wanted power. Every morning she'd walk past the shiny cars parked outside the speakeasies, her reflection bending across the chrome fenders, and she'd whisper to herself one day, "I'll be sitting inside one of those." The Hilliker family lived in the slums near 12th Street, a place where jazz and gunfire sang in harmony. Geneva grew up with rhythm in her blood and danger at her doorstep. The cops were just another gang, the rich just another kind of thief. By 16, she had already learned the golden rule of the streets. The ones who smile the most usually hold the sharpest knives. When her mother died of pneumonia in a freezing apartment, Geneva didn't cry. She took the last of her mother's lipstick, a deep red shade called Crimson Rebel, and painted her lips before walking out into the rain. "Ain't no one gonna save me," she whispered to the empty street, "so I'll do it myself." That was the night she started working for Vinny Caldera, a slick-talking bootlegger who ran the West Side. Vinny saw something in her the moment she walked into his smoke-filled bar. "You don't belong here, sweetheart," he told her with a grin. "You belong on top." Geneva didn't smile. She just leaned forward and said, "Then tell me how to get there." Vinny liked that fire. He made her a runner first, carrying messages, moving cash, sometimes delivering more than just words. She learned fast. Learned who to trust, no one, who to flatter, everyone, and how to use charm as both shield and sword. When a man twice her size grabbed her wrist one night, Geneva broke a bottle over his head and didn't flinch as he hit the floor. Vinny laughed from across the room and said, "Guess the kitten's got claws." In truth, Geneva wasn't trying to impress him. She was testing herself, to see if she could do what needed doing. The streets were full of wolves, and she wasn't planning on being the meal. Within months, her reputation spread through Kansas City's underworld. The girl with the red lips, they called her. The one who looked like trouble and didn't mind proving it. But what set Geneva apart wasn't just her ruthlessness. It was her discipline. She never drank, never smoked, never lost control. While the men around her burned through money and loyalty, Geneva observed. She listened. She learned the roots, the weak spots, the patterns. Power didn't come from violence, she realized. It came from information. By 18, she was running her own deals behind Vinny's back, small ones at first. A few crates of whiskey here, a bag of jewels there. When she walked through the door of a backroom poker den, the music stopped. Men twice her age tipped their hats and prayed she wasn't there for them. Still, power has a scent, and it always draws attention. Vinny started hearing whispers. About shipments gone missing, about someone who moved product smoother than he did. When he confronted her, Geneva didn't deny it. She just smiled, slow and deliberate like a cat cornering a mouse. "You taught me everything I know, Vinny," she said. "I just learned faster than you expected." He should have killed her right then. But he didn't. He poured her a drink instead. That's when Geneva realized she had him, not with fear, but with fascination. Men like Vinny never feared losing control until it was already gone. For a while, they became inseparable. Partners in business, lovers in the dark. Together they ruled the city's underground, their names whispered in the same breath as power and sin. But Geneva knew love in that world was just another loaded gun. One day it would fire. The only question was who'd pull the trigger first. As the months passed, the world outside changed. Prohibition was tightening, the feds were moving in, and the streets grew meaner. But Geneva stayed calm. She'd built her life on chaos, and she wore it like silk. In a world run by men who shot first and thought later. She was something rare, deliberate, patient, and lethal in red. One night, as she stood on the rooftop of a downtown hotel, watching the city glow beneath her, Vinny came up behind her. "You ever wonder how this all ends?" he asked, his breath warm against her neck. Geneva smiled faintly. "I already know how it ends. Just don't know who's holding the gun yet." That line would come back to haunt her years later. But that night it was just words carried off by the wind. She turned toward him, her lipstick glinting in the moonlight, and kissed him like it might be the last time. In that kiss was everything Geneva Hilliker ever was: danger, desire, and the quiet promise of betrayal. From that rooftop, the story of the red-lipped rebel was born. A girl who rose from the gutter to play with kings. A woman who learned too early that power never comes free. It always comes with a body count. And though the city slept beneath her feet, Geneva was wide awake, her heart ticking like a trigger. She didn't believe in fate. She believed in choices. And she was about to make one that would change everything. The gunmetal heart inside her beat steady, strong, and ready. Tomorrow she'd make her first kill. Not for revenge, not for money, but for survival. Because in Geneva Hilliker's world, you didn't live by luck. You lived by the gun. By the time Geneva Hilliker turned 19, Kansas City had already whispered her name through every alley and jazz club. She wasn't just a rumor anymore, she was a storm in heels. Vinny Caldera's girl, sure, but anyone who paid attention knew better. Geneva wasn't standing beside him because she needed protection. She was there because it was the best place to study power up close, to learn how to take it. Vinny loved the spotlight. He thrived on danger, on being the man everyone feared and envied. But Geneva? She preferred the shadows. While he soaked up the cheers in the clubs, she sat in the corners, memorizing faces, deals, and betrayals. Every handshake told her a story. Every laugh carried a secret. She knew which politician was dirty, which cop was desperate, and which gangster would sell out his boss for a cut of the next shipment. She kept her notes in her head, never on paper, never out loud. In that silence, her empire began to take shape long before anyone saw it coming. It started with a man named Charlie Rourke, a small-time bootlegger who'd gotten sloppy. One night he lost Vinny's money in a poker game and vanished into the fog. Everyone said Charlie was as good as dead. But Geneva saw something different. She found him herself, cornered and trembling in a warehouse down by the river. "You stole from the wrong man, Charlie," she said, her voice steady as the river outside. He stammered, pleaded, promised her everything he had left. Geneva just stared at him. "Everything you have left," she repeated softly. "Isn't much." Then she made him a deal. One that would define her future. She didn't kill him. Instead, she took his operation, his contacts, and his loyalty. Within a month, the whiskey that once flowed for Vinny was flowing through Geneva's hands instead. Charlie became her first soldier, bound not by fear, but by belief. That was the moment she stopped being just Vinny's girl. She became the red-lipped rebel. Her signature look began to emerge. The scarlet lipstick, the black gloves, the trench coat that flared like wings when she walked. Men started to whisper that the red on her lips was blood from her enemies. Geneva didn't bother correcting them. She knew the myth was more powerful than the truth. But power has a pulse, and it doesn't stay quiet for long. Vinny noticed the change. He noticed the extra cash, the new car, the way his lieutenants started looking at her for orders instead of him. And one night, after a long evening of whiskey and music, he finally asked, "What are you really after, baby?" he said, leaning against the bar, the smoke curling between them. Geneva didn't blink. "Respect," she said. "And respect doesn't come in second place." Vinny laughed, but his eyes didn't. "You keep reaching like that, you're gonna fall." Geneva leaned close enough for him to smell the faint hint of gun oil beneath her perfume. "Then I'll make sure I land on something soft, like your throne." It was playful, but they both knew there was truth hiding in the joke. As prohibition deepened, the city split into factions. The Italian mob controlled the docks, the Irish the speakeasies, and the Hilliker Caldera operation danced dangerously between them. Geneva was the one who kept the balance, negotiating truces, brokering trades, smoothing chaos with charm and strategy. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was building an empire of her own design. Every night she'd sit at her vanity, wiping away the day's lipstick and staring at her reflection. "You wanted power," she'd whisper to the mirror. "Now earn it." Her turning point came during what became known as the Red River Run. It was supposed to be a simple delivery, 3 trucks of premium Canadian whiskey heading south. But the convoy got ambushed on the bridge by rival gunmen. Bullets lit up the night like fireworks. Vinny's men panicked. They scattered, firing blindly into the dark. Geneva, calm as ever, climbed out of her car and walked straight into the gunfire. She didn't shoot. Not at first. She waited. She listened for where the shots came from, for when they paused to reload. Then she struck. 2 clean shots, 2 dead men. The rest fled. When it was over, the bridge was slick with rain and blood. Vinny's men stared at her in disbelief. She reloaded without a word, the lipstick on her mouth unbroken. From that night forward, her legend grew. The newspapers started calling her the red-lipped rebel, the woman who fought like a man but planned like a general. The cops wanted her. The mob feared her. The people admired her. She didn't crave fame. She used it. Every headline made her harder to touch. Every whisper made her myth stronger. But behind the power and glamour, Geneva was still the girl from 12th Street. She knew how fast the tide could turn. Every empire falls, and the smart ones build lifeboats before the flood. So she started investing, not in money but in people. She built her own network. Loyal bartenders, desperate widows, street kids who owed her their lives. They became her eyes and ears across the city. It wasn't long before she had more information than the police chief himself. She knew where the next raids would happen, which warehouses were under watch, and who was planning betrayal. That knowledge became her shield and her sword. Still, power comes with isolation. The higher she climbed, the fewer people she could trust. Vinny saw the distance growing between them. Some nights he'd come home drunk, furious, muttering about betrayal. Other nights he'd hold her close and say, "We're untouchable, baby. You and me against the world." And Geneva, ever the actress, would smile and kiss him, all while knowing that soon it would be her against him. The breaking point came one cold winter morning. A rival crew tried to intercept her shipments again. This time they succeeded, because someone had tipped them off. Geneva traced the betrayal back not to her men, but to Vinny himself. He'd made a secret deal with the Italians to sell her out in exchange for his safety. The discovery didn't break her heart. It hardened it. That night she returned home calm as ever. She poured him a drink, kissed him softly, and whispered, "I was wondering when you'd show your real face." He froze, realizing too late what she knew. Her gun pressed lightly against his ribs. Not enough to kill, but enough to make him listen. "I learned everything from you, Vinny," she said, her voice low, cold, including how to walk away before someone else pulls the trigger. She didn't kill him. Geneva wasn't driven by rage. She left him alive, but stripped of everything. Within a week his men defected. His money vanished. His name became poison in the underworld. Geneva Hilliker walked out of his life with nothing but her lipstick, her gun, and an empire ready to be claimed. By 21, she was the queen of Kansas City's underworld, the red-lipped rebel who'd outsmarted every man who tried to own her. But deep down, she knew what power demanded, a sacrifice she hadn't yet paid. The city adored her. The mob respected her, and the law hunted her. And Geneva? She just kept smiling because she knew something none of them did. Every empire looks invincible right before it starts to burn. By the mid-1930s, Geneva Hilliker was no longer a name whispered in the corners of Kansas City. She was a force, the red-lipped rebel who controlled more of the city's underground than any man dared to dream. Her clubs glowed like fireflies in the dark, filled with jazz, perfume, and danger. Men came to drink and gamble, but they stayed because they wanted to see her, the woman in red who could turn a room silent with a single glance. She had built her empire on precision, not chaos. Every night, as the trumpets wailed and the dice rolled, Geneva's eyes scanned the room like a hawk. She didn't just run the game, she was the game. Every bottle that poured, every deal that passed, every rumor that floated, all of it led back to her. Money was power, and she had both in spades. Her operations stretched across Missouri and into Chicago. Smugglers, politicians, and crooked cops all owed her favors. She paid them in silence. the kind that could ruin or save a man's life, depending on how he played his cards. But what made Geneva truly dangerous wasn't her wealth. It was her calm. Other gangsters ruled with rage. She ruled with restraint. Violence to her was a tool, not a language. When her men got into shootouts, she'd appear afterward like a ghost, smoothing her gloves and asking only one question. Was it worth it? Those who failed to answer wisely didn't last long. One of her clubs, the Crimson Room, became the beating heart of her empire. Its red velvet drapes and mirrored walls reflected both glamour and fear. Politicians sipped champagne there under fake names. Detectives played cards beside hitmen. And Geneva sat above them all, watching the city feed on itself like a hungry animal. She had everything she'd once dreamed of: power, respect, and a kingdom built on her own terms. But success has a way of drawing shadows. The more she rose, the darker the world around her became. It started with the arrival of a man named Elias Crane, a federal agent with a reputation for cracking impossible cases. He was sharp, relentless, and completely unlike the usual corrupt lawmen Geneva had on her payroll. He didn't want money. He wanted her downfall. Their first encounter happened one rainy night when she was leaving the Crimson Room. He stepped out from the shadows, his hat low, his badge flashing under the streetlight. "Geneva Hilliker," he said quietly. "You wear your crimes like jewelry." She smiled, unbothered. "And you wear your righteousness like a target." He didn't arrest her. He just tipped his hat and walked away. But that look, that calm certainty in his eyes, told her something she hadn't felt in years. Someone finally saw through her armor. In the weeks that followed, the pressure tightened. Raids began hitting her supply lines. Trucks vanished. Informants went missing. The air in her empire grew heavy with suspicion. Geneva, ever composed, didn't panic. Instead, she adapted. She moved her operations underground, burned her old ledgers, and started paying her men in gold coins, untraceable, untaxable, untouchable. But paranoia is a poison that seeps slowly. Even Geneva wasn't immune. She began sleeping less, keeping a gun beneath her pillow. Sometimes when the city was silent, she'd walk her empty clubs, heels echoing against marble floors, and stare into the mirrors. "You wanted to rule," she'd whisper to her reflection. "Now rule it." Still, the cracks were showing. Elias Crane wasn't just chasing her empire. He was studying her, watching who she met, what she wore, how she moved. And somewhere in that relentless pursuit, a strange respect began to form. One night, he cornered her again. This time, inside a church where she'd gone to hide a shipment beneath the floorboards. She turned, pistol raised, but he didn't reach for his gun. "I don't want to kill you," he said, "but I can't let you keep killing everyone else." Geneva stared at him for a long moment, then lowered her weapon. "Then you better learn to shoot faster, Agent Crane." Their rivalry became something twisted, a dance between hunter and hunted, built on mutual fascination. Every move he made, she countered. Every trap he set, she turned into a business advantage. Newspapers called it the Hilliker War. Meanwhile, her competitors were circling like vultures. The Italian syndicates in Chicago wanted a piece of her territory. The Irish wanted revenge for the deals she'd broken. Even her own lieutenants started whispering about betrayal. Among them was a man named Tommy DeLuca, her enforcer, her confidant, and the closest thing she'd had to loyalty since Vinnie Caldera. Tommy had been with her from the early days, tough, loyal, dangerous. But lately she'd caught him in too many lies. Late-night phone calls, missing money, strange meetings in the alley behind the Crimson Room. One evening, she invited him to dinner at her penthouse. Candlelight flickered across silver plates. The jazz record spun slow and sad. Tommy tried to act calm, but his hands wouldn't stop shaking. "I hear things," Geneva said softly, cutting her steak. "Things that make me doubt you." Tommy swallowed hard. "You know I'd never—" She raised a hand to silence him. "Don't lie to me, not tonight." From her coat pocket, she pulled a folded piece of paper, a letter bearing his signature, promising information to the Chicago mob in exchange for a cut of her roots. His face went pale. "I didn't mean it," he stammered. They forced me. Geneva stood, walking around the table until she stood behind him. Everyone's forced, Tommy, she said quietly, but not everyone breaks. There was a click, the sound of her pistol being cocked. He turned to face her, eyes wide, mouth trembling. Please, Geneva. She kissed his cheek gently before pulling the trigger. The gunshot echoed through the apartment like a curse. For a moment, she just stood there, staring at the body slumped over the table, blood staining the white tablecloth. Then she sat back down, poured herself a glass of wine, and whispered, "Loyalty is a luxury I can't afford." That night marked a turning point. Geneva's empire had never been stronger, but her soul had never been darker. Every friend became a threat, every victory a warning. Even her reflection seemed like a stranger wearing her face. By now, Elias Crane had gathered enough evidence to move in. Raids swept across the city. Her warehouses burned. The Crimson Room was boarded shut. But Geneva refused to run. She'd built her empire from nothing, and she'd be damned if she'd watch it crumble from the sidelines. She called a meeting of what was left of her crew in the basement of a shuttered theater. Her voice was cold, steady, unbroken. "They think they can bury me," she said, loading her revolver. "Let's make sure they dig 2 graves." And with that, the red-lipped rebel went to war. The city erupted in chaos. Shootouts in the streets, bombs in parked cars, police sirens wailing through the night. For every piece the law took from her, Geneva took 2 back. But even as she fought, the net was closing in. Power had given her everything, and now it demanded payment. As dawn broke one morning, Geneva stood in her burned-out club. The velvet curtains turned to ash, the mirrors shattered. Smoke curled around her like ghosts of everything she'd lost. Her kingdom was dying, and for the first time in years, she looked afraid. But fear didn't suit Geneva Hilliker. She straightened her coat, wiped a smudge of blood from her lip, and smiled faintly. "If this is the end," she murmured, "then I'll make sure it's beautiful." The war Geneva Hilliker started didn't just burn through Kansas City, it consumed it. For weeks, gunfire became the city's soundtrack, echoing down alleys and through shuttered windows. The air reeked of smoke, blood, and fear. Headlines screamed her name every morning, each story more dramatic than the last. The red-lipped rebel declares war on the law. Hilliker empire crumbling. The woman who wouldn't fall. But Geneva never saw herself as a headline. To her, this was survival, pure and simple. The law wanted her in chains, the mob wanted her dead, and every man she'd ever trusted had turned into a ghost. The only thing she had left was her resolve, that cold, diamond-hard will that had carried her from the gutters of 12th Street to the throne of Kansas City's Underworld. Still, even diamonds crack under enough pressure. After the fire that destroyed the Crimson Room, Geneva moved her base of operations to an old slaughterhouse on the edge of town. The irony wasn't lost on her, a queen ruling from a place built for butchery. Inside, the floors were cold concrete, the air heavy with the scent of rust and oil. Her loyal crew, what was left of it, worked in silence, knowing one wrong word could be their last. Every day brought new losses. One shipment seized, one safe house raided, one body found floating in the river. Geneva stayed calm in front of her men, but when the nights stretched long and quiet, she'd sit alone in her office, the glow of a single lamp tracing her silhouette. Sometimes she'd run her thumb along the barrel of her revolver, thinking of all the names attached to it. Too many. Then came the betrayal, the one that broke her. It started with whispers about a deal. Someone inside her circle had made arrangements with Elias Crane, the federal agent who'd spent years chasing her shadow. The rumor said that Geneva's own second-in-command, a quiet man named Ray Monroe, had been feeding information to the feds. Ray had been with her since her earliest days, loyal, dependable, silent as stone. When the rumor reached her, Geneva didn't react. She simply ordered everyone out of the room and called Ray in. He came quietly, hat in hand, eyes low. The two of them sat across from each other at the old butcher's table that now served as her desk. Rain pounded against the windows. "Tell me it isn't true," she said softly. Ray hesitated, his jaw tight. "You know me, Geneva." "I thought I did." He looked up then, and for the first time, she saw it. Guilt. It flashed across his face like lightning. Gone in an instant, but enough to confirm everything. "You were like family," she said, her voice trembling in a way it never had before. "You ate at my table. You swore on your mother's grave." "I didn't have a choice," he interrupted, his voice breaking. "They had me cornered. They knew about the warehouse hits, the accounts in Chicago. Crane said if I didn't talk, they'd hang me." Geneva stood slowly, her shadow stretching long across the floor. "And you thought you'd save yourself by selling me?" "It wasn't supposed to go this far," he said, tears in his eyes. "They promised you'd get a deal." "Deals," she said, the word sharp as glass. "That's all men like you ever offer." For a long time there was silence, just the rain and the sound of her gloves tightening as she loaded her revolver. Ray didn't beg. He didn't run. He just nodded once, accepting what he knew was coming. When she fired, it wasn't rage that guided her hand. It was heartbreak. Afterward, Geneva poured herself a drink, staring at the lifeless body on the floor. "You were the last one I trusted," she whispered. "Now I trust no one." By dawn, she was gone, leaving behind the slaughterhouse, the crew, and the crumbling remains of her empire. She knew the city wasn't hers anymore. The gangs had divided what she built, the cops were closing in, and Elias Crane had finally drawn his noose tight enough to feel around her neck. But Geneva Hilliker had never been the kind to surrender. She vanished into the countryside, renting an old farmhouse under a false name. For weeks she lived like a ghost. No lipstick, no velvet, no men, no guns. Just a bottle of bourbon, a fading photograph of her mother, and the sound of wind through broken shutters. Sometimes she'd walk into town under the cover of night to buy cigarettes and newspapers. Her picture was everywhere, America's most wanted woman. Some articles painted her as a monster, others as a legend. Geneva didn't know which hurt more, but peace never lasts in a life built on violence. One morning, she woke to the distant sound of engines, a convoy heading down the dirt road toward her safe house. She looked out the window and saw the telltale flash of badges in the sunlight. The law had finally caught up. She didn't panic. She just sat on the edge of her bed, applied her lipstick one last time, and smiled faintly at her reflection. "If they want Geneva Hilliker," she murmured, "then they'll get her. The way she's always been." When the first knock came, she was already standing by the window, gun in hand. "Geneva Hilliker," a voice shouted. "You're surrounded. Come out with your hands up." She laughed softly. "You've been chasing me for years, boys. You really think I'm gonna make it easy now?" The next moments unfolded like a scene written by fate itself. The agents moved in, surrounding the farmhouse. Geneva fired first, 2 sharp shots into the air, just enough to startle them. Then came the return fire, splintering wood, shattering glass. Inside, Geneva moved like smoke, calm, graceful, deliberate. She knew she wouldn't win. That wasn't the point. She just wanted to end it her way. When the shooting stopped, Elias Crane himself stepped into the doorway. His gun was drawn, but his expression wasn't one of victory. It was pity. "Don't do this," he said quietly. "You've got nowhere left to run." Geneva smiled, her lipstick perfect even in the flickering light. "You were always the only one who could keep up, Agent Crane." He took a slow step forward. "You don't have to die today." She tilted her head, considering that for a heartbeat, then shook it. "Maybe not today. But women like me don't get tomorrows." For a moment, they just looked at each other, 2 souls bound by the same obsession, standing on opposite sides of the law. Then she raised her revolver, not at him, but at the sky. The gunshot echoed across the empty fields. When the smoke cleared, Geneva Hilliker lay motionless by the window, her crimson lips curved in a faint, defiant smile. Outside, the sirens wailed like mourning bells. The red-lipped rebel, the woman who'd lived by the gun, had died by it too. Elias Crane stood over her body for a long while, his badge heavy on his chest. He'd spent years trying to bring her down, but in the end, it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like the end of an era, one painted in smoke, whiskey, and red lipstick. The papers called it justice. The streets called it tragedy. But the underworld whispered something else entirely, that Geneva Hilliker didn't die that morning. That somewhere, out west, a woman with a scarlet smile and a gunmetal heart still walked among them, waiting for the world to forget her name. And maybe, just maybe, they were right. They found her body in the back alley of a forgotten town, her red lipstick still perfect, her revolver cold against her palm. The newspaper said it was a tragic end to a notorious woman, but those who had known Geneva Hilliker, truly known her, said she went out exactly the way she wanted, beautiful, dangerous, and in control of her fate. The story of Geneva didn't end with her heartbeat. It lingered in whispers, in the trembling voices of those who crossed her, and in the hesitant admiration of women who saw her as something more than a criminal. She was defiance personified, a woman who refused to be caged by the rules of men or morality. For years after her death, bars across Chicago and Detroit carried the same rumor, that she wasn't really dead. Some said she'd escaped to Cuba. Others swore they'd seen her reflection in a passing train window, a red-lipped smile framed by cigarette smoke. It didn't matter if it was true. Geneva had already become immortal in the minds of those who lived in her world. Old-timers still talk about the way she walked into a room, slow, deliberate, as if the air itself bent around her. Geneva didn't need to raise her voice to command respect. Her silence was enough to make gangsters shift in their seats. Even the toughest men in the underworld said she had eyes like polished steel, the kind that didn't blink when a gun went off. But for all her power and charm, Geneva's story was a tragedy wrapped in glamour. She was born into a world that taught her to fight for survival, not for love. Every choice she made, every bullet fired, every deal struck, came from a need to stay one step ahead of a world built to crush her. She wore lipstick like armor and carried secrets heavier than any gun she ever held. Her legacy wasn't just in the bodies left behind or the cash that vanished into hidden accounts. It was in the message she left behind, that power, for a woman like her, was both a weapon and a curse. She played the game better than most, but the game always plays back. Years later, a young reporter named Howard Green became obsessed with Geneva's story. He'd grown up hearing his father's tales about the red-lipped rebel, the woman who outsmarted mob bosses, outshot rivals, and danced with danger until it finally caught up. Howard dug through police files, old photos, and yellowed letters from prison archives, trying to separate myth from reality. What he found wasn't the monster the papers described. Beneath the sensational headlines, Femme Fatale turns on her own, Mob Queen dies in blaze of glory, he uncovered something more human. A girl who had once dreamed of owning a record shop. A woman who learned early that charm could be deadlier than a bullet. A soul haunted by the ghosts of every man she'd trusted and lost. In one letter, written to an old friend weeks before her death, Geneva wrote, "If I ever go down, I want it to be by my own hand, not the world's. I'd rather die with red lips than live with regret." That line alone became legendary. It was quoted in plays, films, even tattooed on the arm of a blues singer in New Orleans. Geneva Hilliker had transcended crime. She had become poetry for the damned. In the underworld, she became a cautionary tale and an anthem. Men told her story as a warning. Don't trust a pretty face with a gun. Women told it as a promise. They'll never forget us. Her old haunts became relics. The speakeasy where she made her first deal turned into a jazz bar called the Rebel's Den, with a portrait of her hanging above the counter, crimson lips, revolver at her hip. Every night someone would raise a glass to her name, whispering, "To Geneva, may the world never tame your fire." Even in death she divided opinions. To some she was a villain. To others, a visionary who carved her own destiny when society refused her a place. But to everyone, she was unforgettable. The truth about her death still twists like cigarette smoke. Some say she was betrayed by a lover, the final kiss that ended her. Others claim she staged it all, slipping away into the shadows to start anew. The autopsy report disappeared, and the detective who handled the case quit the force 2 weeks later, muttering something about the devil wearing perfume. Maybe that's the way Geneva wanted it, for her ending to stay uncertain, untouchable. Because in her world, mystery was power, and that's how her legend survived the decades, through unanswered questions, through the ache of what might have been. Every story like Geneva's carries a lesson, though few are willing to hear it. It's not just about crime or passion, it's about control. She showed that a woman could command her fate in a world designed to deny her that power. But she also showed that power comes at a price. Her beauty opened doors, but her ambition locked her in rooms full of danger. She was never the damsel, never the sidekick. Geneva Hilliker wrote her own script, and she wrote it in gunpowder and lipstick. When you think about her, you can almost hear the echo of jazz in the distance, the click of heels against wet pavement, and that unmistakable voice whispering, "They'll remember me." And she was right. Geneva's name might not appear in history books beside Capone or Luciano, but in the dim corners of criminal folklore. She reigns eternal, the red-lipped rebel who burned too bright for her own world. Her story reminds us that legends aren't born. They're made in the smoke and chaos of choices, and Geneva's choice was to live dangerously, die beautifully, and be remembered forever. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe for more tales from the shadows of history, stories of power, betrayal, and the unforgettable souls who dared to live by their own rules.